Good morning to members of the media, viewing and listening audience on the World Wide Web, fellow citizens. Welcome to the opposition's weekly press conference. My name is Devendranath Tanku and I'm the Member of Parliament for Urpuch West. Joining me today in studio is my colleague, Dr. Rudal Munilal, Member of Parliament for Urpuch East. Today, we will be highlighting a few critical issues facing our citizens, and as always, we will be presenting the opposition's concerns and recommendations. The most significant issue on the national psyche at this point in time is the COVID-19 pandemic. Trinidad and Tobago is suffering from three pandemics. They are all related. The first is the COVID-19 health crisis, which has resulted in over 556 deaths and over 26,000 positive cases, which have stretched not just our healthcare system, but the various agencies which provide technical, human resource, and institutional support to this Herculean effort. I want to sincerely thank all frontline workers, including all members of the national security agencies, the police, the fire services, the members of the military, the army, the Coast Guard, etc. Today, unfortunately, we saw in the media these very same stalwarts of our country suffering, begging, pleading to the government to provide additional or sufficient personal protective equipment for them to protect themselves. And yet, despite the fact that the government has failed so to do, these individuals continue to go out and provide national service to Trinidad and Tobago. On behalf of a grateful nation, I thank you, we thank you. We also want to sincerely thank other frontline workers, grocery and pharmacy workers, and all our medical practitioners, as well as the staff of all medical facilities, who even under severe attack from the government have continued to provide service to this nation. The second pandemic that we have been exposed to, that we are battling right now, is the COVID-19 social and economic crisis. Government mismanagement since 2015 has resulted in the contraction of the economy, as evidenced by the closure of multiple businesses and the loss of over 65,000 jobs before COVID. Since January 2020, government's targeted policy has resulted in the virtual collapse of the micro, small, and medium-sized business sector. This in turn has caused the loss of thousands of more jobs, pushing large segments of the population into absolute poverty. I cannot unsee the heartbreaking photographs carried in the media of women standing holding signs with their children, holding signs, begging at various establishments for food, begging for support of any kind for themselves and their families. The recent slashing of income of CPEP workers, already among the lowest paid employees in the country, will push even further thousands into absolute poverty. This social and economic crisis is real, and all this government can offer is a hodgepodge of unsustainable short-term reactions. But there's a third pandemic, a COVID-19 induced governance pandemic, demonstrated by the incompetence of the government in dealing with both the health and socio-economic crises I referred to before. This government tells us that we are all in this together, but the fact is that we are not. To paraphrase, we are all in the same storm, but we are in different circumstances. Some are doing well, some are taking over businesses, some are posting huge profits, some are barely able to survive, jostling between the hungry cries of their children on the one hand and families, and the government's directive to stay home, jobless, penniless, and hopeless. For more than 1 year, the government led by the Honorable Keith Christopher Rowley has used state-sponsored public information time to engage in public relations and victim shaming rather than managing the situation properly. It was blame Kamala, it was blame COVID, it was blame the citizens, and now it's back to blame Kamala again. This crisis of leadership is the exact reason we are in the situation that we are in today. Yes, Prime Minister, it could have been worse, but it should have been better. Had he been a caring, people-centered Prime Minister. But he is no Kamala Prasad successor. The government focus in every press conference to deal with COVID has been on providing information on one of these crises only, the medical situation, aided by a ton of graphs, charts, and data. Nothing about addressing the social and economic crisis. Nothing for citizens who have lost their jobs. Nothing for the thousands of children out of school now for more than a year who still have no access to online schooling or to devices. Nothing for the tens of thousands of children who used to receive a meal from the school feeding program, but for whom for months have received not one crumb. Nothing for the self-employed, the doublesman, the nutsman, the roti shop, or the thousands of other enterprising men and women who invested in small businesses, but who have been forced to close without notice and without any clue when they will be allowed to reopen, all the while having to pay rent, electricity, water bills, and the ever-present bank loans. These may be non-essential workers to the government, but their jobs are essential to them. Many businesses have tried to hold out as long as they could, but government has put nothing in place for businesses. If a company like KFC cannot afford to pay stipends to their staff, imagine what is happening to small businesses and their staff. We are not all in the same boat, ladies and gentlemen. Many are struggling, many are drowning. One only has to look at the media today, today's newspapers, with screams of headlines screaming that the country is in crisis, that people are suffering, and the government has not been able to step forward to provide assistance. The Minister of Finance in an election year in 2020 was able to provide 229,827 grants in addition to food hampers to needy persons. This was before August 2020, just before the election. As soon as the election was over, although the social and economic conditions had worsened significantly, the government turned its back on the very same citizens. From then to now, nothing for these people. I challenge the Minister of Finance today to tell this country what information he used to decide that those persons no longer needed support after the PNM1 election. It is a matter of public record that 7,000 of the poorest citizens living in absolute poverty made the effort, filled out the form, submitted all the information, answered all the questions, qualified, and the Minister of Finance simply ignored them for 1 year. I am aware as well of numerous persons from my own constituency who applied for various grants under the Ministry of Social Development and up to today have received not even the courtesy of a response. Not 1 cent for thousands of them. I call on the Minister of Social Development and Family Services today to tell us how many people applied, how many people were rejected and why, and how many people qualified but today have not received a cent. The Minister of Finance also told the country that the vast majority of medium, small, and micro enterprises that applied for support last year during the same period did not get any help from this government. Minister Imbert allowed those MSMEs, desperate then, to run bankrupt now. Those few who may have survived have since been shut down by government policy. In the election year, citizens of this country were lulled into a false sense of security under the PNM. But today, we are seeing the real effect of this PNM. You know, even the most basic of things, such as providing hampers, which so many private citizens and organizations have been able to do over the years, this government has found a way to facilitate bacchanal and racket. On May 4th, the Prime Minister announced that the government via NAMDEVCO was going to provide 600 hampers to members of parliament for distribution to the very needy in their constituencies. Each of these hampers would feed an average family of 4 for about a week, which means that 600 families would have been able to have food for 1 week in the month of May. These families were expected to survive for the other 3 weeks on air, in the middle of a lockdown, with almost every business closed, unable to even go outside for a temporary job to cut grass and make a little hustle. 600 hampers in my constituency of 35,000 men, women, and children is a drop in the ocean. But that was not the insulting part. That was not the lie. 1 week later, after we had submitted the 600 names to NAMDEVCO, the company wrote to tell us that each member of parliament would only be getting 400 hampers. Because, and I quote, NAMDEVCO is working with our farmers, some of whom have been affected by the recent and continuing rain, to supply the produce that they had previously committed to. We are experiencing some shortfalls. That is what NAMDEVCO wrote to each member of parliament. We are experiencing some shortfalls. This was confirmed subsequently by the Minister of Agriculture. But God does not sleep, and he dislikes liars. Within days, the population saw a Facebook post by a recently defeated PNM candidate celebrating that she had received 100 hampers from NAMDEVCO to distribute in the constituency which he had fought and just lost a few months ago. When the scandal hit the social media, the PNM quickly withdrew the post and changed the script to claim that it was an NGO, a non-government organization, headed by the same defeated candidate that in fact received the hampers, as if that was a good enough explanation. To date, ladies and gentlemen, NAMDEVCO has not provided a satisfactory explanation for this fiasco. Neither has the Minister of Agriculture. Indeed, in fact, instead, miraculously, NAMDEVCO would have us believe that farmers' crops were able to multiply almost by magic, and the number of hampers due to MPs immediately went up back to 600 after the social media bacchanal bus mark. Suddenly, NAMDEVCO was offering MPs 200 more hush hampers. But how did this individual get hampers from NAMDEVCO without meeting any of the qualifying criteria imposed on MPs in the first place? How many other groups were able to access hampers from NAMDEVCO secretly? Why was this opportunity to provide hampers so that other persons and NGOs could have distributed? Why was this opportunity not publicized so that transparency and equity in distribution could have been focused on? Why was there secrecy? Were only PNM control groups provided with these hampers? Why the lie that the farmers were unable to supply? Those questions remain unanswered up to today. This is a serious matter, ladies and gentlemen. This is not PNM money. This is not NAMDEVCO money. This is taxpayers' money and must be accounted for. But the corruption does not stop there. Yesterday, Mr. Darrell Rampasad, the president of the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago, made some serious, damning allegations against NAMDEVCO. He advised that he has received multiple reports from the farming community that only a handful of farmers were being allowed to supply material, fresh produce, to these various hampers, for the provision of these hampers. Worse than just that, he reported that certain persons were now operating as middlemen, buying produce cheaply from farmers and selling that same produce to NAMDEVCO for upwards of 300 and 400% of the prices that they were paying. What makes this claim even more credible, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that the very same farmers who were making that claim were present when the president of the Agricultural Society was making his case. They were present and they endorsed what he was saying. If what is being reported is in fact true, this is wanton corruption from start to finish, from procurement to distribution, with taxpayers being forced to fund this obscene racketeering at NAMDEVCO and presided over by the Minister of Agriculture. You know, when the Minister of Agriculture was asked to explain what has happened, instead of providing some level of clarity, instead of agreeing to have some sort of investigation being done, the minister chose to attack the very same individuals, the very same whistleblowers, the very same persons who were pointing out corruption. He attacked those very same persons without a single shred of evidence to prove that the allegations of corruption and racketeering that they were making was not true. During this pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, it is no secret that domestic agriculture, it has been domestic agriculture, these very same farmers who have sustained the vast majority of us, despite the government's treatment of the industry as a bastard child. Our nation owes these farmers a debt of gratitude for risking malicious persecution by the government and choosing instead to speak up in the public interest and defend the public purse when the government appears to have deliberately turned a blind eye. This could not have transpired, ladies and gentlemen, without the participation and knowledge of persons in NAMDEVCO and in the Ministry of Agriculture. Who is involved? Who are the beneficiaries of this loot? And why is it being facilitated? Ladies and gentlemen, this works out to be millions of dollars of taxpayers' money stolen by corruption. Today, I call for an urgent and independent public audit of this program. Every dollar, ladies and gentlemen, lost in corruption at NAMDEVCO could have been used to fund additional hampers or to otherwise provide relief to the tens of thousands of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who today desperately need support. But the issue of corruption is made even more important because of the extent of government borrowing under the guise of COVID debt, under the guise of COVID relief, under the guise of the need to spend behind COVID support for Trinidad and Tobago. This government has been borrowing to finance debt, ladies and gentlemen. In August 2020, the government was forced to dip into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund for amongst other reasons, because, and I refer to this, because it needed an urgent and substantial cash injection to the consolidated fund to avert the potential risk of non-payment on issued checks, etc., as a result of insufficient funds. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, the consolidated fund from which the government draws money and spends, that's the government's bank account. The consolidated fund did not have sufficient money in it to meet the needs, to meet the bills that the government was running up, to meet the requests for payments and the checks that the government were writing. The consolidated fund was in crisis. Since then, we know that government revenues have collapsed. We know that the government has been borrowing billions and billions and billions with an increasing foreign debt component. As government policy has contracted the economy, so too it has reduced government revenue from traditional sources. A recent publication to which I had referred to previously, and which has not yet been disputed by the Minister of Finance, suggested that this government has accessed over $10 billion in loans and grants, including drawdowns from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, for the purpose of COVID-related spending. This does not include monies allocated under the 2021 budget for COVID relief. Where has all that money gone, ladies and gentlemen? The fact is that the relief from the government to people and businesses have been precious little. In addition to the thousands who did not get the salary relief grant, in addition to those thousands who did not get the salary relief grant, and the 1,000 more who did not get any support via the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, or the small and medium-sized enterprises which receive no support from the government at all, there are still tens of thousands of people who didn't get anything, not even that little chitty. I called today for an independent audit as well into all monies borrowed for the COVID relief and for the purposes for which it was used. Ladies and gentlemen, in the coming week, this country will presumably finally will be given some information via the media review from the Ministry of Finance. In this media review, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that the Minister of Finance will correct the mistakes that he has made, will correct the oversights that he has refused to implement, will fix the problem that he has turned a blind eye to. We want to see, ladies and gentlemen, rental assistance provided last year, but not a cent provided this year, even though the conditions are worse. We want to see rental assistance grants and other forms of social support. Salary relief grant and income support grants cannot be a one-off payment. That is hush money. We want to see a clear plan to incentivize business and to restart the economy. We don't want to hear the same talk we heard last year, repeated this year as a new plan. We want to see particular support for the MSMBS, the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, including businesses who have been forced into bankruptcy and closure as a result of this government's policy. We want to see an injection into the agricultural sector, incentivize agriculture and create market security for farmers. We want to see a deliberate fostering of new business initiatives with foreign exchange earning potential. We want to see, ladies and gentlemen, a true statement of the current status of the consolidated fund I referred to before, which was in crisis 1 year ago, before the government crashed the economy even further. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you, and I turn over now to my colleague, Dr. Rudal Munilal.
Okay, thank you very much, MP Tanku, and good morning to one and all listeners, viewers on the various social media platforms, tuning in to our regular Sunday morning media broadcast. MP Tanku has raised some very, very critical issues, very distressing as well as it relates to the further and deepening mismanagement of the economic handling of this crisis that we face. There can be no doubt that we are, of course, living in unparalleled and distressing times and facing a national and, of course, a global challenge on all fronts. I, of course, did not have the displeasure of listening to the Prime Minister yesterday, but received sufficient reports and have read the various statements and newspaper articles and so on. Quite frankly, I think that Dr. Rowley should seize these weekly press conferences. I think they get citizens more angry and possibly more pathological with the continuing type of conversation that the Prime Minister is having, buffing up and quarreling with the nation as time goes by. But there are a couple of matters that arise from yesterday which I would like to reply to and respond to. But first, let me put the point on the table that I found it to be extremely obscene, callous, insensitive that the Ministry of Health has now embarked on what could be called a graft attack. They are now grafting their way through this crisis, and the Minister of Health, the Prime Minister, must take responsibility for this. I am not here this morning to attack any particular public officer, public official, health professional, and so on. But these press conferences are politically motivated. And this graph attack that we saw yesterday was callous, insensitive, and obscene in the context where we have had now, as of yesterday, I believe it was, and we have the data here so we can be 100% sure, we have had deaths, 564 deaths as of yesterday. and for the Ministry of Health to be telling this country that 564 persons have died from COVID. And just to put this in the context of recent developments, for the month of May, we recorded 326 deaths at an average of 10 per day, more or less, and over 13,000 new cases of COVID-19 at an average of 422 per day. And for the ministry to be grafting their way through to tell a population that is under so much distress and pain, and to tell families of these 564 persons and the 325 families whose loved ones died in May, to tell them that, look, this thing could have been worse, it could have been 100 a day. So, please accept that. Don't accept our sympathy, our compassion, accept that it could be worse. That is callous, it is obscene, it is insensitive, and the ministry should cease and desist from that type of narrative. There, at no time does the minister or the prime minister extend deep empathy and concern and prayer with the loved ones who have survived and who will live now with this pain and burden for many, many years and decades to come, that their loved one died. And to come now with this insensitive, callous and obscene graph to show 100, it could have been more, 100 a day, I think it deserves the strongest level of condemnation. Related to that, I noticed that Dr. Hines or none of the health professionals there gave us a graph that could tell us that if we had administered 351,000 doses of the vaccine in February, when they were available through the private sector, how much would have been the death toll today? How much? Would it have been 50% less? Would it have been 75% less? Why don't you do a graph and tell us if this government had closed the borders properly on the Southwest Peninsula, if they had procured vaccine in a timely manner when they were getting help from the private sector, what would have been the death toll today? What would have been the infection rate today? That is the question we must answer. Not to state to persons who are in pain and suffering and anguish, who cannot even see their loved ones, to tell them that, look, it could have been worse, so be quiet. That is callous, as I said before. There's no doubt that the Prime Minister has now started a new chapter to seek to explain to persons that good times are ahead or better times are coming. We now have the promise of the United States, 800,000 Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccines. If that does materialize, it is welcome. We welcome that. In fact, we would want to thank the United States of America, President Biden, and the people of the United States for once again rescuing Trinidad and Tobago from the People's National Movement and Keith Rowley. We want to thank the USA for rescuing us, assuming that materializes, because we are never sure. Assuming that materializes, we thank the United States for rescuing us and for helping somewhat to bail this government out slowly from the incompetence, the ineptitude, and the corruption that MP Tanku spoke about earlier today. And we thank them for that, because it is very clear that notwithstanding all the health protocols and the importance of those protocols, it is vaccination, it is herd immunity that will save countries like Trinidad and Tobago and elsewhere from the calamity that we face today. So that much is clear. Incidentally, when the Prime Minister outlined yesterday the vaccines and the program, and they are coming and all are coming and so on, there was no issue of the cost. We heard that we pay down, but we haven't heard the cost of these vaccines, and let us say the cost per jab or the cost per dose of these vaccines, so that the taxpayer can understand where the money is going, how much is being used for this, as opposed to how much is being used for what MP Tanku is now describing as a corrupt system of procuring some types of assistance from a select few in the farming community. So that is an important point, because it underlines a global concern. It is well documented and well established now that we must aim to be part of a one world protected from COVID-19. It will come from vaccination. And the World Health Organization has indicated, as we all share the view, that no one is safe unless everyone is safe. No one can be safe unless everyone is safe. And therefore, that must guide us. Partnerships are key. Throughout the world today, the governments of various nations and territories are working with the business community. They are working with the scientific community. They are working with civil society. They are working with NGOs and so on to have mass vaccination. In the United States, the private sector is leading the charge. To use a term used by the Attorney General, the private sector is today the engine of the vaccine train. That vaccine train that we're hearing about, the engine of that is the private sector. In the United States, they have all type of programs now to incentivize. You can get a meal, you can get a ride, you can get a free this, a free that to take your vaccine. And vaccines are for all, whether citizens, residents, or visitors to the United States. And the private sector is leading the way. In Trinidad and Tobago, could we say honestly that this government has built a culture of partnership with the business community, with the scientific community, with the NGOs, with civil society? They have not, because their policy has been driven by malice, spite, and hate. You condemn the opposition. You condemn the opposition leader. Anything we say don't make sense. You condemn that. But they will not build partnerships to ensure that they save the country through vaccination primarily. So there we are with vaccines. We do hope that the vaccines as promised would come. In fact, I personally am very happy if we have an oversupply of vaccines, because it is also established in the international press that several areas where persons have received the Sinopharm vaccines, they are now seeking to have a third dose, what is called a booster dose, in some countries. And if we have surplus supply, if and when a third dose is necessary, we may well have that as well. So we welcome vaccines. We welcome all. May I now go on to a second issue concerning the CPEP program. Now, over the last few days, we have had a typical pattern of confusion, a typical pattern of left hand don't know what right hand is doing. And here we have two notifications, media releases, both dated June 4, 2021, of course, a couple of days ago. One from CPEP, one from the Ministry of Rural Development, under which CPEP falls. We have two. On the one hand, CPEP is saying that they have reduced the time of workers. They have reduced their working hours and effectively how much days they work per week. So they will institute a system where persons will get 2/3 or so, they will lose 1/3 of their salary. CPEP is stating this, reduce workers' salary, and incidentally they said CPEP clarifies. So if ever a clarification brought confusion, this was it. So CPEP clarifies that they are now, the board took a decision to reduce working hours to 4 hours per week. The effect of this was that persons' fortnightly pay would move from a little bit over $900 to $600 and I believe $35. So you lose 1/3 of your salary and so on. And they say we are proud that nobody will lose their job. We are proud that we can still serve and no one. In fact, this government has been boasting for some time that no persons in the public service have lost their jobs. Now, before the ink dried on this release, another release came our way from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. It says we want to clarify, so both are clarifying. We want to clarify payment of a salary grant to CPEP workers. They are saying that the CPEP is closed down and we are going to give everyone a grant. Stay home, it's a stipend. So they clarify the clarification of the CPEP company. The Prime Minister compounded, as he is wont to do, the confusion yesterday by saying, look, CPEP is now shut down. People will get a stipend, they stay home, and it will be akin to a social welfare stipend, a grant. And he says now, we are doing this not only because of the money, we don't want people out there. We don't want them out there social, congregating and so on, and spreading the virus. So these two confusing releases and this Prime Minister's statement raise several issues. First, are workers who are home receiving their stipend, do they continue to pay NIS? Are they continue to be termed employees? Do they pay health surcharge? can you unilaterally suspend the payment of NIS because you have changed now the category of these workers from employees to recipients of social welfare? They are no longer employees. How long is this stipend to be paid? For how many weeks or months, as the case may be? Now, these are serious issues. The government has unilaterally altered the terms and conditions of employees. There's a further question here. CPEP has, more or less, 200 supervisory, managerial, and executive staff receiving, from recent scandals, receiving what could be significant salaries. Again, I don't want to get into that at this time. Are the managers and executive managers, supervisory staff of CPEP, are they also on a stipend and staying at home? Or do they continue to get their full executive and managerial salaries while the workers at the lowest rung, including many single mothers, while they are at home receiving a public assistance grant? Do managers continue to get 100% of their salary? That is the question. Because there is clearly an inequality here, that the lowest rung of the ladder, persons who have to pay rent, who have to buy groceries, who have to buy medicines, who have to take care of young children, who may have to take care of the elderly, sick, elderly, they have had their salary effectively slashed by 33%. I remind people the last time a government did this in the 1980s, late 80s, I believe, the court ruled that that was illegal. In any event, it is another matter. This is not for me to pronounce on matters of law at this time. Others can do that. They have gone now to alter their terms, send home workers, give them a stipend. They are no longer employees, but managers may well be receiving 100% of their fat salaries. That is a matter that I call upon the government to probably issue a third statement to qualify and to clarify what is the situation with the managers, supervisory staff at CPEP. They can issue a third statement and further clarify that. Because it is unfair, and I want to just end by saying that CPEP has in its employ thousands and thousands of employees at what is called the elementary level, lower income level. They depend on every cent they receive as disposable income. The CPEP worker don't bank their money in Miami, in Hong Kong, and in Switzerland. They spend 100% of their income is disposable income. Therefore, that affects as well the supermarket, the pharmacy, the small business sector. That affects every single thing along the economic chain. And you are further undermining the business community. This government has a lockdown mentality. We are one of the few nations in the world, and I challenge anybody to prove me wrong, where a lockdown has led to an increase in infection and death. No country in the world or no state in the world, even in India, these states and so on, when they go into strong lockdown, they have they balance that with data to show that the lockdown has led to a reduction in infection and a reduction in death. Trinidad and Tobago has the opposite effect. As you lock down more, you increase death and infection more. That has been the experience in Trinidad and Tobago. And no one can explain that. No one, or the government certainly, are not trying to explain that. It means that the state of emergency that came into effect, I believe, around May 15th, that has failed. So the government policy is really to shoot in the dark. It's to shoot in the dark. It's government by VUP and by VAPs. So they now have the curfew changing on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, tonight, I believe. So someone told the government that between 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there's unbelievable frolicking across the country. There's some hidden pocket, large pocket of the population who party and fet and congregate between 7 p.m. to 9, only on 3 nights. This cannot happen and does not happen on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It happens only on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That is the government we have today. They don't have a clue. And as MP Tanko and others have said, they must bring an economic plan to reopen business, because clearly the increase in infection and the death toll is not linked anymore, we can say, to restaurants and entertainment and so on. It cannot be linked to that, otherwise the figures would have gone down. So there must be an economic plan to deal with the business community, the small-scale manufacturing and business community, the micro-entrepreneurs, certain sectors of the economy that needs to be reopened. Barbados, I believe, is now welcoming cruise ships. Barbados. Trinidad and Tobago had the most horrific and inexcusable approach to procuring vaccines on the planet. They just did not know what was happening until Uncle Sam said, we have some vaccines, not doing anything, and we'll give you. They had no clue. And we call upon the government to reinforce that point, to present by next week a clear economic plan as for the reopening and re-energizing of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, and stop hiding behind a failed state of emergency, and stop tampering and tinkering with the minutes of the curfew as if that will matter. When the Prime Minister spoke yesterday, no one would have believed that 19 persons died 24 hours before. When he spoke yesterday, no one would believe. That was the second highest death rate for a day in recent memory here. And the Prime Minister speaks that never happened. And all is well, and we'll get the vaccines. We must get the vaccines, and we must have more centers throughout the country. Dr. Gopi Singh and others have spoken about the importance of having mass vaccination throughout the country, not only in health centers, but at business places. The very CPEP company, if you had brought in vaccines in February, they could have vaccinated their workers and their families already and been working today and not been home on some strange and suspicious policy initiative of paying a stipend. Employers can vaccinate employees under the supervision of the Ministry of Health. It happens all over the world. So the vaccination program requires more centers, private and public, employers and the private sector becoming involved much more in the vaccination. Throughout the world, the military is assisting in remote areas and countries to vaccinate, get villagers vaccinated and so on. And this is what this government has failed miserably to do. So that we tell the population, we welcome the vaccines. But if 1 million vaccines land in Piarco tonight, there's no assurance that that will be distributed, administered in an effective and rapid manner. And that is the issue. We should be looking at not 2,000 vaccines a day, but 15,000 vaccines a day administered to our population, so we can get to the figure, the promised figure of herd immunity. That is what the government should be dealing with. In terms of we spoke, of course, of the importance of vaccination. I would just summarize now, because those are the two key issues I wanted to raise. The issue of this graph attack yesterday, the issue of the CPEP, to indicate that we have also taken note, and we congratulate and thank for their service the doctors, the health professionals who have been working around the clock, who have been treated with some degree of disdain and scorn by a rogue CEO and other elements in the health sector. We thank them for their service. And I want to reiterate again a point we made earlier. We must have, and we call for a complete public inquiry into the death of every single person who have died because of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago. I remind the population that for 25 years or so, this country was in mourning over the death and the destruction associated with the attempted coup in 1990. 24 persons died in 1990. And that is sad, that is tragic, regrettable. We mourn those persons. Today, 564 have died. We must have an inquiry, because this government stands accused of criminal negligence. If in an inquiry, it can show from the evidence that one death or more than one death was preventable. We need to know the circumstances under which those persons died, the quality of medical care that was available, the quality of medicines, whether medicines were available, equipment were available at that time. Where did they die? Today, no one can say when 19 people die, where they die, exactly where, in the ICU unit, on the tent in the pavement, at their homes. We need to know where, circumstances, quality of medical care, resources available. Every single life that has been lost is a valuable life, is a son or daughter of Trinidad and Tobago. And we must not let people die every day with a callousness and a numbness. Today, every day as 4 o'clock reach, you look around and you ask, what is the score? What it is today? 18 for 500, 17 this, 15 that. And as you hear it, you get a cringe and you feel sad, and then 10 minutes later you forget. And the next day, 4 o'clock, you look again, how much today? That is where this nation is reaching. It is a nation that is becoming numb to pain, suffering, and death. And today we say no more of that. Every single person who have died is a daughter, is a son of this country. And they deserve, for closure, those families deserve to know under what circumstances did their loved one die. And a full public inquiry is required. And Minister Diyal Singh could stand accused of neglect of the highest order if it is shown that those deaths were preventable. And we call for such an inquiry. There's a room, there's a facility as well at the Parliament through the Joint Select Committee that the RHA, their boards, their leadership, the rogue leader, CEO, I think he was trained in managing shows or something like that. He's now a manager of the health institutions and unilaterally becoming a power unto himself. He must present himself to a Joint Select Committee of Parliament to face stiff questions on his conduct, on his decisions, and his neglect and maladministration. So these are some of the issues we raised today in this context. And I believe we have a facility where persons can ask questions, so we'll take some questions. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Okay. We have Priya Bihari from ACP News.
Hi, good morning. Priya Bihari, ACP News.
Good morning.
My question, I don't know if either one of you, Dr. Munilal or Mr. Tangku can answer. I want to find out, since we have so many vaccines now in the countries, different types, would you see vaccine preference becoming an issue? And the second question following from that is that in terms of the money we are paying for that, you think that taxpayers would get the money's worth in terms of we having a number of vaccines and the cost of them and how exactly they will be distributed, and if you think they'll be distributed in an equitable manner? Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priya. Priya, this question you're asking is really a question to the members of the medical and scientific community. What I can say is that from my experience as an elected member, and MP Tangku is also in the same boat, so to speak, I have found that what we have in Trinidad and Tobago is not vaccine hesitancy as much as vaccine anxiety. There are a lot of people who are calling us and asking us to help them to get an appointment for vaccines. Yes, there's a small pocket of people, for different reasons, including health, who are hesitant to take the vaccine, or any vaccine for that matter. But there's a large group of persons now, not one day goes by in which people don't call me to ask me if I can assist to get an appointment for a vaccine. I think people want to take the vaccines. I think a lot of young people in particular want to take it. They are waiting, they are making appointments. It is very difficult. As of now, I'm not sure we have a lot of vaccines in the country, because what Dr. Rowley was doing yesterday was giving the promised land. If you remember yesterday, 100 next week, 800 beginning in August, 800,000 beginning in August. August is 2 months away or so. 800,000 beginning in August, 100,000 next week. So we don't have that amount of vaccines in the country today, and this is why at the health centers it's difficult to get an appointment. The related question is really a scientific question, in that I know there's now some contention in the literature as to whether persons can take one shot of one and the next shot of another. That is not a matter that myself could comment on. But I know in the United Arab Emirates in particular, in the Washington Post of June 3rd, just a few days ago, there was a story in the Washington Post that suggested that persons who did take the Sinopharm vaccine are being encouraged to take a third vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, as a booster. So apparently it is possible, but that is really a matter for more the medical people to comment on.
Prior, you also asked about the cost of the vaccine. It is also an issue of concern for us, because to date we have not gotten any indication from the government how much these vaccines are costing, and how much is costing the taxpayers of this country, how much are being given gratis. and where that money and that support and that financing is coming from. You will be aware as well that in October last year and coming forward, the government has continuously indicated that it was placing orders, it was investing in the COVAX facility, etc. We have no firm knowledge to date how much money has been spent by this government in the pursuit and acquisition of any of those vaccines. It seems that our press conference was very well received and well informed. I want to thank members of the viewing audience for their time and for lending us their ears today. I wish you all a phenomenal Sunday. And on behalf of Dr. Munira and myself, I urge you all to please be safe and exercise caution in going about your daily duties. Remember, COVID starts early tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.